She dismissed him in less than 5 minutes, already convinced he wasn't worth the job. But when she spotted a child's drawing that had fallen from his folder, something stopped her cold. In that moment, she realized she couldn't just let him walk away. Marcus Reyes hadn't closed his eyes all night. The small apartment was still heavy with the sharp smell of children's medicine and the faint rasp of his son's breathing. Leo, only 6 years old, had tossed and whimpered through a fever that refused to break. Each time the boy stirred, Marcus was there, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, rocking him with one arm, whispering reassurances in a low voice, stroking the damp hair from his forehead. At some point, Marcus had balanced a notebook across his knees, trying to scrawl down possible answers to interview questions while cradling the boy against his chest. His handwriting leaned, tired, and jagged, each line smudged where the pen had pressed too long or where his calloused thumb had brushed across the ink. Every few minutes he'd glance at the clock on the wall and remind himself, this interview was his chance, maybe his only chance, to turn things around. But the hours slipped past in silence, broken only by Leo's coughing fits. By dawn, Marcus's shirt was wrinkled from holding his son, and his body ached from sitting in one position too long. Still, he rose. He couldn't afford to collapse. The boy needed antibiotics, healthy food, maybe a real bed instead of the lumpy mattress that sagged in the middle. When the sun finally touched the apartment blinds with a weak yellow light, Marcus laid Leo down as gently as if he were glass. The child murmured, "Daddy, don't go," half in a dream. Marcus bent close, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I'll be back soon, champ. You just rest. Daddy's got to try and make today count." He tucked the thin blanket up to the boy's chin and kissed his warm temple. In the cramped corner of the room that served as his closet, Marcus pulled on the best clothes he could manage. A borrowed shirt a friend from church had pressed into his hands, saying, "You'll need this more than I will." The collar pinched and one cuff button was missing, but at least it looked presentable. His shoes were scuffed from years of wear, but he buffed them with an old rag until the dull leather gave a faint shine. He found his resume, the paper creased and marked with fingerprints from too many revisions, and slid it carefully into his worn briefcase. That briefcase had belonged to his father, long gone now, and Marcus carried it like a lifeline, as if the faded leather itself might give him strength. Before leaving, he looked back once more at Leo. The boy was curled on his side, breathing unevenly but calmer than before. Marcus whispered to himself, "For you. Everything's for you." Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, and walked out into the morning, carrying both hope and exhaustion like invisible weights. By the time Marcus reached downtown, the city had already shaken itself awake. Glass towers glittered in the pale morning light, buses hissed at crowded stops, and men and women in pressed suits hurried along the sidewalks clutching coffee cups like battle gear. Marcus walked the last 3 blocks because the bus fare had gone to Leo's medicine the week before. Each step pressed the ache deeper into his legs, but he forced himself forward, the strap of the briefcase digging into his palm as if reminding him what was at stake. At 9 a.m. sharp, he stood before the mirrored facade of Silverton Logistics. The building rose like a fortress of steel and glass, its polished surface reflecting a version of the world Marcus didn't belong to. For a moment, he caught his own reflection, rumpled collar, tired eyes, hair combed with more hope than success, and almost turned away. Almost. But he tightened his grip on the briefcase and told himself what he always told Leo. Bravery isn't about feeling ready. It's about showing up anyway. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the clipped sounds of wealth. Heels tapping, keyboards clattering, the hum of polite voices trading efficient greetings. The floor gleamed with marble, so spotless Marcus hesitated to step on it, as though his scuffed shoes might leave behind a permanent mark. Receptionists in sleek black blazers moved with rehearsed precision, sliding papers across polished counters, answering phones with smooth, confident tones. A cluster of candidates waited on modern chairs near the wall, men with trimmed beards, women in sharp dresses, every one of them with polished resumes and a poise that said they had done this 100 times before. Marcus sank into the only empty chair, the leather cool against his back. He felt the other candidates glance at him. The uneven collar, the tired lines around his eyes, the shoes that no longer held their original shine. He pretended not to notice, but inside, his chest tightened. He reminded himself he wasn't here to impress strangers. He was here because a boy with a fever was counting on him. He pulled the resume from his briefcase and smoothed it with careful hands. A smudge of ink from the long night stood out like an accusation, but he folded the page back into the folder and set it on his lap. When the door to the interview room opened, a woman with a crisp hairstyle and sharper eyes called his name. Her voice carried no warmth, only expectation. Marcus rose, legs stiff, and walked toward her. The murmur of the lobby faded behind him, replaced by the quiet thrum of his heartbeat in his ears. He entered the room not as a polished candidate, but as a father on the edge, clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, would look past the scuffs and see the fire beneath. The office was neat to the point of sterility: polished desk, framed certificates, a clock ticking with mechanical precision. Behind the desk sat Miss Jella, her hair styled into a severe knot, her pen poised as if it were a weapon. She didn't rise when Marcus entered. She only glanced at him, then at the clock, her lips already set in a line. "Marcus Reyes," she said, her voice clipped. "You were late." Marcus stopped halfway to the chair. His throat tightened. He wanted to explain that Leo had woken gasping in the night, that he'd walked 3 miles because the bus money had gone to medicine. But the weight of her stare pressed him into silence. He managed only, "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, my son." "This isn't daycare," she cut in. The pen scratched against paper before he'd even sat down. "Let's begin." Marcus lowered himself into the chair, clutching his briefcase like it might anchor him. He forced his voice steady as he spoke of his experience. "I managed warehouse teams before the layoffs. Learned logistics on the floor by doing. Organized routes, trained workers, cut costs without cutting people." His words were plain, honest, carved from years of real work. But each answer landed with a dull thud. Miss Jella sighed, glanced at the clock, scribbled without looking at him. Her pen seemed louder than his voice. When she asked about his degree, Marcus shook his head. "No degree, just years in the field." She arched one brow, as if that alone confirmed her doubts. "Why should we hire someone who can't even show up on time?" The question sliced through him. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. His mind filled with truths he could never say aloud. "Because I sold my last working phone to buy antibiotics last week. Because every dollar goes to inhalers, to groceries, to keeping a little boy alive. Because I have walked through storms and kept working when others quit." But none of those words came out. To speak them would feel like begging, and Marcus had promised himself he wouldn't beg, not even now. He swallowed hard, jaw tight, and forced himself to meet her gaze. "I understand," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm not what you're looking for." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Miss Jella finally set down her pen. "You can go," she said flatly. No hesitation, no second thought. Marcus stood. His legs felt heavier than when he had walked in, but he held his back straight. He nodded once, not trusting his voice, and left the office with his briefcase clutched like a shield. For all his preparation, for all his sleepless night, it was over in less than 5 minutes. The lobby doors hissed shut behind Marcus, and the sudden quiet of the parking lot hit him harder than Miss Jella's words had. Inside, the building still buzzed with order and ambition. Out here, there was only cracked pavement and the distant hum of traffic. He walked a few steps before stopping in the middle of an empty row. The worn briefcase hung heavy in his hand, suddenly useless, as though it carried every rejection he'd ever known. He tipped his head back, staring at the stretch of sky caught between glass towers. For a second, he thought he might scream, but the sound caught in his throat and turned into silence. Rent was due in 3 days. The fridge at home held half a carton of milk, 2 eggs, and bread hardening at the edges. Leo needed better than that. The boy needed fruit, medicine, warmth. He needed a father who could hand him something more than excuses. Marcus closed his eyes, and the memory of the morning came back sharp. Leo's small hand gripping his shirt as he whispered, "Don't go." What would he tell his son tonight? That daddy had tried, but trying hadn't been enough? That the world didn't have space for men who wore borrowed shirts and carried resumes stained with fingerprints? His chest tightened until he pressed a fist against it. Failure wasn't just disappointment. It was the image of Leo coughing in the dark, asking for water while Marcus counted coins in his palm, wondering if they could stretch until the end of the week. Failure meant his boy might start believing that heroes only lived in drawings, not in real life. Marcus dropped onto the curb, elbows braced on his knees, the briefcase at his feet. His breathing came rough, almost ragged, but he forced himself to hold it together. He couldn't collapse. Not here, not where strangers might see. The cracked asphalt blurred as his eyes stung. He blinked hard, whispering under his breath like a prayer, "I just needed one chance." Then, footsteps. Sharp, measured. The sound of heels striking pavement. Marcus lifted his head slowly, uncertain if he was ready for anyone to see him like this. Marcus blinked against the sunlight as the footsteps drew closer. He turned his head, expecting maybe a security guard coming to move him along, or another candidate rushing out with better news. Instead, it was her, Miss Jella, heels clicking against the pavement, posture straight as if the parking lot were just another boardroom. For an instant, Marcus thought she'd come to scold him again. He rose halfway, bracing himself. But her expression wasn't the same as it had been inside. The sharp angles in her face seemed softer now, less made of ice, more of something he couldn't name. "I saw your son's drawing," she said. Marcus frowned, not understanding, until she held up a folded piece of paper. His heart jolted. He recognized it immediately. A crayon sketch, bright with uneven strokes. A stick figure man holding the hand of a smaller boy under a sun with too many rays. At the top, in Leo's crooked letters, "My daddy is a hero." "It slipped out of your folder," she added quietly. Marcus's throat closed. That's Leo," he managed, voice unsteady. For the first time, she really looked at him, not at his shoes, not at the clock, but at his face. "Do you know why I'm in HR, Mr. Reyes?" she asked. Her voice no longer carried the clipped efficiency of the office. It carried weight and something personal. He shook his head. "Because I watched my father work himself into an early grave," she said. Her gaze drifted past him to somewhere far beyond the parking lot. He was always on time, always perfect, never present. The company loved him, but I barely knew him. He gave them everything, and in return, they gave him nothing but a headstone. She paused, the words hanging in the air between them. "That drawing," she said, lifting it slightly, "is the first reason I've had in months to believe in this company again. To believe that maybe what we do can mean something more than numbers on a spreadsheet." Marcus swallowed, his lips parting but no words coming out. He didn't know how to respond. The air between them felt altered, like the invisible wall of glass and steel that had separated them inside had cracked, letting in something warmer, something human. She took a breath. "I can't hire you officially today. The role you applied for is closed. But there's a night shift opening, documents, inventory prep, quiet work. It pays weekly." She hesitated, just for a moment, as though unsure if she should cross the line she'd always kept between herself and the people she judged. Then she finished. "I think your son deserves to see his hero win." The words landed like rain after drought. Marcus stared at her, disbelief flooding through him, until his knees felt weak. From the sidewalk, a security guard who'd overheard gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if the world had balanced itself just slightly. "I'll take it," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I'll take anything." As he turned to leave, still dazed, she called after him. "Oh, and next time, wear that same shirt." Her mouth curved just enough to suggest a smile. "Makes you look like a man who survived something." For the first time all day, Marcus almost smiled back. That evening, Marcus pushed open the apartment door with a paper bag balanced in one arm and his briefcase in the other. The familiar scent of the place, medicine, damp towels, the faint mildew of old walls, greeted him, but tonight it didn't feel quite as heavy. He set the bag gently on the counter, listening. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the soft wheeze of Leo's breathing from the bedroom. He unpacked the groceries first: milk, bread, apples, a packet of chicken, even a small carton of orange juice. Not much, but more than he'd carried through the door in weeks. Then he opened the smaller paper bag marked Welcome Kit. Inside lay a badge, a shift schedule, and, tucked at the bottom, a handwritten note. The words stopped him cold, for the hero who showed up. His chest tightened. He slid the note back inside carefully, like it was too fragile to touch. From the bedroom came a cough, small but sharp. Marcus hurried in. Leo had shifted in his sleep, his blanket tangled at his feet. The boy's eyelids fluttered open as Marcus bent down, and his voice came out drowsy, cracked with fever. "Daddy, did you get the job?" Marcus froze. The question cut straight through him. For a moment, he saw again the sterile office, the dismissive glances, the humiliation of being told he wasn't enough. But then he saw Miss Jella holding up the drawing, her voice softening as she said his son deserved to see his hero win. He sat down on the edge of the bed and brushed his hand across Leo's hair. A smile broke across his face, thin at first, then fuller, warmer, despite the tears stinging his eyes. "I got something better, buddy," Marcus whispered. His voice trembled, but he kept it steady for his son. "I got hope." Leo blinked up at him, too tired to understand fully, but comforted by the certainty in his father's tone. He snuggled closer, resting his head against Marcus's side, and within moments drifted back into sleep. Marcus stayed there in the dim light, listening to the rhythm of his son's breathing. For the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like defeat pressing in from every direction. It sounded like tomorrow might actually hold something new. Word of what had happened in that glass tower spread quietly but firmly. The receptionist who had seen Marcus walk in with nervous eyes told the story to a colleague. The security guard, who had overheard the exchange in the parking lot, mentioned it later to a friend over coffee. By the end of the week, people inside Silverton Logistics were repeating the same detail. How a man came in wearing a borrowed shirt, failed an interview in minutes, and still walked out with something more valuable than pride. The lesson traveled further than the company's walls. Some who heard it called it compassion, others called it luck, but to anyone who has ever stood on the edge of despair, it meant something deeper. It meant that professionalism doesn't begin with polished shoes or perfect timing. It begins with humanity, the willingness to see another person as more than their flaws. Strength, too, looked different in Marcus's story. It wasn't measured in confidence during an interview or in the shine of a resume. It was measured in a father's steady arm rocking a feverish child through the night, in walking miles to save bus fare for medicine, in showing up even when the world seemed intent on closing its doors. And in the crayon lines of a child's drawing, strength looked like something simple but enduring, a man and a boy standing together beneath a sun, one word scrawled above them: hero.